Taylor Swift was known for her grace under pressure. Whether on stage in front of tens of thousands or navigating the intense scrutiny of the public eye, she had mastered the art of staying composed, but nothing could have prepared her for what happened one quiet morning in a cozy Nashville cafe. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. It was a brisk autumn day, the kind that Taylor loved. The air was crisp, the leaves painted in fiery hues of orange and red, and the cafe's large windows let in a cascade of golden sunlight. Taylor had decided to treat herself to a rare moment of anonymity. Wearing a simple oversized sweater, jeans, and sunglasses, she hoped to blend into the crowd. She carried a notebook in one hand and a cup of steaming chai latte in the other. This was her sanctuary, a place to write lyrics and gather inspiration away from the relentless pressures of fame. The cafe was bustling but calm, filled with the soft hum of chatter and the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. Taylor found a corner table, tucked herself in, and began jotting down ideas. Her thoughts flowed easily as she sipped her drink, the comforting rhythm of the cafe serving as a backdrop to her creativity. But tranquility shattered like glass when a voice erupted near the counter. "Why is she even here?" The words rang out sharply, slicing through the cafe's warm ambiance. Heads turned, conversations ceased. Taylor instinctively looked up to see a man standing near the counter, pointing directly at her. He was in his late 40s, dressed in a rumpled suit with a face twisted in indignation. His voice, loud and accusatory, carried a bitterness that was impossible to ignore. "She thinks she's better than the rest of us. Coming in here like she owns the place," he spat, his words tinged with a venom that shocked even the most jaded patrons. The cafe froze in collective disbelief. Taylor blinked, caught entirely off guard. The man's outburst felt unwarranted and deeply personal, even though she couldn't recall ever seeing him before. People whispered in hushed tones, their eyes darting between Taylor and the man. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She removed her sunglasses, revealing her unmistakable face, and looked the man squarely in the eyes. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice measured and steady. "Have I done something to upset you?" Her question seemed to inflame him further. "Oh, don't play innocent," he snapped. "You celebrities think you're so special. You waltz into places like this, pretending to be one of us, but you're not. You're just here for the attention." The room tensed. Some customers began to intervene, murmuring objections to the man's tirade. The barista behind the counter looked ready to call security, but Taylor held up a hand to stop them. She could see the anger in the man's eyes, but behind it there was something else. Pain, maybe even desperation. "Sir," she said gently, "I'm just here to enjoy some coffee and write. I didn't mean to intrude on your space or cause any trouble." Her calm demeanor seemed to disarm him momentarily, but he wasn't ready to back down. "It's not just about you," he said, his voice cracking. "It's all of you, the celebrities, the influencers, the ones who have it all. You don't know what it's like to struggle, to work hard and barely scrape by." Taylor's chest tightened. She had heard variations of this sentiment before, but this time it felt raw, unfiltered, and deeply personal. She could see that this man wasn't just angry at her. He was angry at a world that felt unfair and unkind. Taking a deep breath, Taylor stood up from her table. The cafe watched in rapt silence as she walked slowly toward him, her movements deliberate and unthreatening. She stopped a few feet away, keeping her hands visible and her posture open. "What's your name?" she asked softly. The man blinked, caught off guard by her question. "What does it matter?" he grumbled. "It matters to me," she said. "If we're going to have this conversation, I'd like to know who I'm talking to." He hesitated before muttering, "It's Carl." "Hi, Carl," Taylor said with a small smile. "I'm Taylor." He rolled his eyes. "Yeah, I know who you are." "Then you probably know a little about my life," she continued, "but I don't know anything about yours. Would you tell me about it?" The cafe seemed to hold its breath. This was not the reaction anyone had expected, least of all Carl. He looked at her suspiciously, as if waiting for her to mock him or dismiss his feelings. But Taylor's expression was sincere, her eyes filled with genuine curiosity and empathy. Carl shifted uncomfortably. "Why would you care?" "Because it seems like you're hurting," she said. "And if I've contributed to that in any way, I'd like to understand." Her words cracked something open in him. His shoulders slumped, and the anger in his face began to give way to exhaustion. I've been out of work for 6 months, he admitted grudgingly. Got laid off from my job, and now I can't keep up with the bills. My wife's working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Meanwhile, people like you have everything handed to them on a silver platter. Taylor nodded, absorbing his words without interruption. That sounds incredibly hard, she said after a moment. I'm so sorry you're going through that. Her compassion seemed to catch Carl off guard. You don't get it, he said, though his tone was softer now. You've never had to struggle like this. Taylor paused, choosing her words carefully. You're right that I've been very fortunate in many ways, but I've also faced my own struggles. Different ones maybe, but struggles nonetheless. I grew up in a small town, and my parents sacrificed so much to support my dreams. And even now, with all the success I've had, there are days when I feel overwhelmed, lonely, or misunderstood. Carl stared at her, his anger now replaced by a flicker of understanding. Everyone's pain is different, Taylor continued, but it's not a competition. Your pain is valid, and so is mine. What matters is how we support each other through it. The cafe was silent, the tension replaced by a quiet awe. Taylor's words seemed to resonate not just with Carl, but with everyone present. Carl looked down, his expression softening. I'm sorry, he mumbled. I shouldn't have taken it out on you. It's just, life feels so unfair right now. Taylor reached out and placed a comforting hand on his arm. It's okay, she said. We all have moments when life feels unbearable. But I hope you know you're not alone. There are people who care, even strangers like me. Tears welled up in Carl's eyes, and he nodded. For the first time, he seemed truly at peace. Thank you, he whispered. Taylor smiled warmly. You're welcome. And if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. The moment hung in the air, profound and transformative. The cafe, once tense with conflict, now felt united in compassion. People began clapping softly, their applause growing louder as they witnessed the power of kindness and understanding. Carl wiped his eyes and offered a shaky smile. I think I just needed someone to listen. Well, Taylor said, you've got a whole cafe of people here who care about you. The barista stepped forward, offering Carl a cup of coffee on the house. Other patrons murmured words of encouragement and solidarity. A woman at a nearby table even handed Carl a business card, offering to connect him with a potential job opportunity. As the cafe slowly returned to its usual rhythm, Taylor returned to her table, her chai latte now lukewarm. She picked up her pen and began writing again, her mind buzzing with new inspiration. The encounter had been unexpected and emotionally draining, but it had also reaffirmed her belief in the power of empathy. Later that day, Taylor posted a message on social media. Without naming Carl or divulging too many details, she shared a heartfelt reflection on the importance of compassion, listening, and supporting one another during difficult times. Her post quickly went viral, sparking a wave of kindness and generosity across her fanbase and beyond. Carl's life began to change too. The connections he made that day in the cafe led to new opportunities. And though life wasn't instantly perfect, he felt a renewed sense of hope. He often thought back to that morning, grateful not only for Taylor's kindness, but also for the way it inspired others to rally around him. The story became a reminder that even in moments of conflict, there is room for understanding. Taylor's grace and Carl's vulnerability showed that sometimes the most profound changes come from the simplest acts of humanity. Taylor Swift left the cafe that day with more than just a notebook full of fresh ideas. The encounter with Carl lingered in her mind, heavy yet illuminating, as she strolled down the bustling streets of Nashville. She had always known that fame brought scrutiny, but the rawness of Carl's pain and his misdirected anger toward her had struck a chord. It made her reflect on the vast chasm between perception and reality, and how the human experience, though universal in its emotional core, could vary so wildly in its expression. The cool breeze tousled her hair as she walked, her steps unhurried. Despite the intensity of what had transpired, Taylor felt a strange sense of peace. She had seen a side of humanity that day that wasn't just about anger or envy, but about vulnerability and the quiet courage it takes to confront it. She couldn't stop thinking about Carl's confession, about his struggles, and about how his story mirrored those of countless others who might never voice their pain. Her thoughts churned as she reached her car, parked discreetly a few blocks away. Sliding into the driver's seat, she pulled out her phone and opened a new note. Words poured out of her as she wrote a stream of lyrics inspired by the morning's events. She wanted to capture not just the tension and heartbreak of the encounter, but also the quiet triumph of connection and understanding. The song, she felt, could be a reminder that no one is truly alone, even in their darkest moments. The days that followed saw Taylor diving deeper into the emotions stirred by the incident. In her home studio, surrounded by her guitars, piano, and notebooks, she began crafting a new song. The melody came first, gentle yet haunting, with an undercurrent of hope. Then came the lyrics, weaving Carl's story with her own reflections on empathy and resilience. She titled the song A Stranger's Name, a nod to the moment when she had asked Carl his name in the cafe. As she worked, Taylor thought about how much of her life had been dedicated to telling stories, her own, those of her friends, and even the imagined lives of others. But this felt different. This wasn't just a story, it was a testament to the power of human connection, even between two people who might seem worlds apart. Meanwhile, Carl's life was beginning to shift. The cafe encounter had become something of a local legend, with patrons recounting the story to friends and family. Carl found himself the recipient of unexpected kindness. Strangers paid for his coffee, offered him words of encouragement, and even left small envelopes of cash on his doorstep. One day, he received an anonymous letter that read, "We've all been where you are. Keep going." The business card given to him at the cafe turned out to be a lifeline. The woman who had handed it to him, a recruiter for a local manufacturing company, arranged for an interview. For the first time in months, Carl felt a glimmer of hope as he prepared for the meeting. He wore his best suit, freshly pressed, and rehearsed answers to potential questions, determined to make a good impression. When he walked into the company's office, he noticed a framed photograph on the wall. It was of the same woman from the cafe, smiling with a group of colleagues. The sight grounded him, reminding him of the kindness he had received. The interview went smoothly, and within days, Carl was offered a position as a logistics coordinator. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work with a decent paycheck, and that was all he needed to start rebuilding. Taylor's song A Stranger's Name was completed in record time. She shared it with her team, who immediately recognized its emotional depth and potential impact. It wasn't just another hit waiting to happen, it was a story that needed to be told. Taylor decided to perform it live for the first time at an intimate concert in Nashville, an event that was part of a series to support local charities. The venue, a small historic theater, was packed with fans eager to hear her new material. Taylor introduced the song with a brief story, carefully preserving Carl's anonymity while explaining the inspiration behind it. "This song," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "is about the moments that remind us we're all human. It's about the pain we carry, the connections we make, and the strength we find in each other." As the notes filled the room, the audience fell silent. Taylor's voice, tender and evocative, carried the weight of the story. The lyrics spoke of a stranger's anger, a quiet apology, and the fragile beauty of empathy. By the time she reached the final chorus, the crowd was visibly moved. Tears streamed down faces, and a standing ovation erupted as the last chord faded. The song's release marked a turning point. A Stranger's Name quickly climbed the charts, but its impact went far beyond its commercial success. Fans flooded social media with messages about how the song had touched them, many sharing their own stories of struggle and unexpected kindness. It became a cultural phenomenon, sparking conversations about empathy, mental health, and the importance of connection. Taylor watched this unfold with a mix of awe and humility. She hadn't anticipated that a single encounter could ripple out into something so much larger, but as she read the messages and heard from fans at meet and greets, she realized that the song had tapped into something universal, a deep, unspoken yearning for understanding and compassion. Carl heard the song too. He was in his car, driving home from his new job, when it came on the radio. At first, he didn't recognize it as being connected to him, but as he listened, his hands gripping the steering wheel, a lump formed in his throat. The lyrics mirrored his own experience so closely that it couldn't be a coincidence. When he realized the song was about him, his emotions overwhelmed him. Pulling over to the side of the road, Carl sat in stunned silence. The man who had once felt invisible and defeated was now the inspiration for a song that millions were listening to. Tears streamed down his face, but this time they weren't tears of frustration or despair. They were tears of gratitude and hope. The story didn't end there. Inspired by the song and the cafe encounter, Taylor decided to start a foundation dedicated to fostering empathy and support for those facing hardships. She called it the Bridge Project, symbolizing the connections built between people from different walks of life. The foundation focused on providing resources for mental health, financial support for struggling families, and initiatives to encourage community-driven kindness. Carl became one of the foundation's first ambassadors. Though initially hesitant to step into the spotlight, he soon realized the power of sharing his story. He spoke at events, sharing how a moment of vulnerability and a stranger's kindness had changed his life. His words resonated with audiences, many of whom saw themselves in his struggles. The cafe, too, became a symbol of transformation. Its owner, inspired by the events, started hosting connection nights, where patrons could share stories, support one another, and build a sense of community. The walls were adorned with messages of hope and gratitude written by customers who had found solace within its cozy confines. Years later, Taylor would reflect on that fateful morning as one of the most important moments of her life. It had reminded her why she wrote music, not just to entertain, but to connect, to heal, and to inspire. And for Carl, it was the day that turned his life around, proving that even in the darkest times, a spark of light could lead the way. Their story became a testament to the transformative power of empathy and the enduring impact of a single moment. It showed that sometimes all it takes to change someone's life, and perhaps the world, is the courage to listen, the willingness to understand, and the kindness to care. And as the song, A Stranger's Name, continued to echo across the world, its message remained clear. We are all part of each other's stories, and together, we can make them beautiful. Taylor's reflection on the events in the cafe and their subsequent ripple effect became a cornerstone of her artistic and personal growth. She had always believed in the power of storytelling, but this experience amplified her awareness of how stories could serve as a bridge between individuals who might otherwise remain disconnected. It became clear to her that fame, while isolating in some ways, could also be a platform for fostering meaningful change. As the weeks passed, Taylor made a conscious effort to immerse herself in stories of resilience, empathy, and redemption. She started dedicating her free time to meeting with individuals who had reached out to her, inspired by her song, A Stranger's Name. These meetings weren't publicized. There were no cameras, no press releases. Taylor wanted the moments to remain authentic and untainted by the noise of celebrity culture. She met single mothers working tirelessly to provide for their children, veterans adjusting to civilian life, and young artists struggling to find their voice. Each story she heard reminded her of Carl, and each one further fueled her resolve to use her influence for good. One particularly poignant meeting took place in a small town just outside Nashville. A young woman named Marcy had written to Taylor after hearing the song, sharing how it had helped her cope with the recent loss of her father. Marcy's letter detailed her struggles with grief, and how the song's message of connection had inspired her to open up to her friends and family, something she had previously found nearly impossible. Taylor was deeply moved by Marcy's vulnerability and decided to pay her a surprise visit. When Taylor arrived at Marcy's modest home, the young woman was stunned. "I can't believe you're here," Marcy said, tears welling in her eyes. "Your song, it saved me." Taylor hugged her warmly. "No, Marcy, you saved yourself. I'm just grateful my song could be part of your journey." They spent hours talking, with Marcy sharing memories of her father and how his love for music had shaped her life. As a gesture of gratitude, Taylor brought her acoustic guitar and played a private rendition of A Stranger's Name for Marcy and her family. The moment was intimate, a testament to the profound connections that could be forged through shared humanity. Around the same time, Carl's life was undergoing a transformation of its own. Though initially overwhelmed by the attention his story had garnered, he began to see it as an opportunity to give back. He started volunteering at local shelters and food banks, where he met people who were facing struggles similar to those he had experienced. These interactions gave Carl a renewed sense of purpose, and he found himself sharing his own journey in an effort to inspire others. Carl's story was also gaining traction in unexpected ways. A local filmmaker, captivated by the cafe encounter and its aftermath, approached him about creating a documentary. Tentatively titled The Stranger's Voice, the film aimed to explore themes of empathy, resilience, and the unseen struggles that people carry. Carl was hesitant at first. After all, he wasn't used to being in the spotlight, but Taylor encouraged him. "This isn't just your story, Carl," she said during one of their occasional check-ins. "It's a story for everyone who feels unseen and unheard. Your courage could inspire so many people." Carl agreed, and the documentary began production. It featured interviews with Taylor, the Café patrons, and Carl's family, weaving a narrative that was both deeply personal and universally relatable. When the film premiered at a local film festival, it received a standing ovation, and plans for a wider release soon followed. Back in her own world, Taylor began incorporating the themes of A Stranger's Name into her broader work. Her next album, Echoes of Humanity, was a departure from her previous projects. It was raw and introspective, delving into stories of ordinary people and the extraordinary resilience they displayed. Critics hailed it as her most mature and meaningful work yet, praising its ability to bridge the gap between the personal and the universal. One track on the album, Open Hands, was directly inspired by the Café itself. Taylor wrote about the physical space as a metaphor for the emotional spaces people create when they choose to connect with one another. The song became a favorite among fans, with many dubbing it a hymn for kindness. Taylor also decided to take a more hands-on approach with her fans. During her album's promotional tour, she held intimate Kwanda sessions where attendees could share their own stories of empathy and transformation. These events often left Taylor visibly moved, as fans recounted how her music had been a source of solace and strength during their darkest times. Meanwhile, the Bridge Project, Taylor's foundation, continued to grow. It began as a modest initiative, but the overwhelming response from fans and supporters turned it into a global movement. The foundation partnered with organizations worldwide to provide resources for mental health, job training, and community-building programs. One of its most innovative initiatives was a storytelling workshop series, where participants could learn to articulate their experiences through writing, music, or art. These workshops became a cornerstone of the Foundation's mission. Taylor often attended them in person, sitting quietly as participants shared their stories. She would offer encouragement and feedback, and occasionally she would perform impromptu songs inspired by what she had heard. Her presence added a layer of inspiration to the workshops, but she made it clear that the real stars were the participants themselves. Carl became one of the workshop's most passionate advocates. He discovered a talent for storytelling he hadn't known he possessed, and he used it to connect with others in powerful ways. His sessions were among the most popular, as his down-to-earth demeanor and unvarnished honesty resonated with people from all walks of life. One participant, a teenager named Miguel, credited Carl with helping him find the courage to leave a toxic environment and pursue his dream of becoming a social worker. "I didn't think anyone would understand what I was going through," Miguel said during a panel discussion. "But Carl made me realize I wasn't alone. He gave me hope when I didn't have any." Carl, humbled by such testimonials, often credited Taylor for sparking the chain of events that had led him to this point. "She didn't just change my life," he said in one interview. "She taught me how to help others change theirs." As Taylor's music and Carl's advocacy continued to inspire, the ripple effects extended far beyond their immediate circles. Schools began incorporating lessons on empathy and emotional intelligence into their curricula, citing A Stranger's Name as a cultural touchstone. Social media campaigns using hashtags like #StrangerKindness and #Echoes of Humanity gained momentum, encouraging people to share their acts of compassion and the stories behind them. The Café itself became a pilgrimage site for fans and admirers of the story. Its owner capitalized on the attention in the best possible way, using the increased business to fund scholarships for local students and create a safe space for community events. A mural was painted on one of its exterior walls, depicting a hand reaching out to another, accompanied by the words, "We all have a stranger's name in our story." Despite the whirlwind of activity surrounding her, Taylor remained grounded. She continued to carve out moments of quiet reflection, often returning to the Café where it had all begun. She would sit at the same corner table, sipping her chai latte and jotting down ideas, just as she had that fateful morning. The staff knew her well by now, but they respected her desire for peace, treating her like any other customer. One day, as she was writing, a young woman approached her table hesitantly. "Excuse me," the woman said, clutching a small notebook. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to say thank you. Your song, it helped me reconnect with my sister after years of not speaking." Taylor smiled warmly. "That's wonderful to hear. Thank you for sharing that with me." The woman hesitated before placing the notebook on the table. "I wrote something about it. It's not much, but I thought you might like to see it." Taylor picked up the notebook and flipped through its pages. The woman had written a heartfelt poem about reconciliation, forgiveness, and the beauty of rebuilding broken bonds. Taylor felt a lump form in her throat as she read. "This is beautiful," she said. "Thank you for trusting me with it." Encounters like these reminded Taylor of why she did what she did. The stories, the connections, the moments of shared humanity, they were the fuel that kept her going even on the hardest days. Years later, when people looked back on Taylor Swift's career, A Stranger's Name was often cited as a turning point. It wasn't just a song, it was a movement, a catalyst for change that touched countless lives. For Carl, it was a reminder of how far he had come, from a man overwhelmed by despair to someone who had found purpose in helping others. And for Taylor, it was proof that the most meaningful impact often came not from grand gestures or elaborate plans, but from simple acts of kindness. All it had taken was one conversation, one moment of vulnerability, to set off a chain reaction that changed lives. As time passed, the legacy of that single moment in the cafe continued to evolve, weaving itself into the fabric of countless lives in ways neither Taylor Swift nor Carl could have imagined. The story of their encounter was no longer just an anecdote. It had become a symbol, a reminder that even the simplest interactions could carry immense weight. People from all walks of life were inspired to pause, reflect, and reconsider the way they approached others, especially in moments of frustration or pain. For Taylor, the incident remained a wellspring of creative energy and personal growth. The lessons she had drawn from it shaped not only her music, but also her daily interactions and her perspective on fame. She began writing journal entries that delved into her thoughts on vulnerability, the shared struggles of humanity, and the invisible threads connecting people. These writings were eventually compiled into a book titled Threads Unseen: Reflections on Empathy and Connection. The book became a bestseller, lauded for its honesty and the way it encouraged readers to see themselves in the lives of others. One of the most impactful elements of Taylor's book was its inclusion of real-life stories from fans, people she had met over the years who had shared their own transformative experiences of kindness. Each chapter was framed by a theme: resilience, forgiveness, courage, and tied back to the cafe encounter that had sparked it all. The book didn't just resonate with her existing fan base, it reached people who had never listened to her music, proving once again that storytelling had the power to transcend boundaries. Carl, meanwhile, found his own voice in unexpected ways. As the documentary The Stranger's Voice gained recognition, he became a sought-after speaker at conferences and events focused on mental health and community building. His unpolished, authentic style of communication struck a chord with audiences who saw him not as a polished figurehead, but as someone who had lived through the struggles they faced. He often began his talks by recounting the moment in the cafe when he had lashed out in anger, using it as a touchpoint to explore themes of accountability, growth, and the courage it takes to accept help. During one such event, Carl met a man named George who had been homeless for years and was on the brink of giving up. Moved by Carl's words, George approached him afterward, sharing his story of feeling invisible and forgotten. Carl listened intently, offering encouragement and practical advice. Months later, George wrote to Carl to say he had found a job and a place to live, crediting that conversation as the spark that had given him hope. The ripple effect of the cafe encounter even reached global audiences. Stories inspired by Taylor's song and Carl's advocacy began appearing in media outlets worldwide. A journalist in India wrote an article about a local initiative to provide meals for struggling families, crediting the story of Taylor and Carl as the inspiration. A teacher in Japan introduced the song A Stranger's Name in her classroom to teach her students about empathy and emotional intelligence. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, Leave your comments below and tell us. What are your thoughts on a stranger yelling at Taylor Swift in a cafe? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.